Fall and winter 1941, the war at sea was reaching a brutal crescendo. German U-boat crews, once hailed as heroes, were about to confront a grim new reality. For decades, the narrative of U-boat warfare was often steeped in a certain mythology. Daring commanders, stoic crews, unwavering resolve. However, the historical record and the experiences of those who survived paint a far more complex picture. By late 1941, the strategic landscape had shifted dramatically. The German advance at Moscow had stalled. The British launched an offensive in North Africa. And crucially, the United States had entered the war. This combination created a far more dangerous and uncertain environment for U-boat operations. The human cost was becoming catastrophic. Of the 40,000 German U-boat men who served in World War II, 30,000 did not return. This staggering casualty rate, a 75% chance of not surviving, fueled a pervasive sense of dread and fatalism among the men who remained. The era of U-boat dominance was drawing to a close. In quick succession, prominent commanders like Prien, Sheppey, and Kretschmer, men whose names were synonymous with early successes, were lost in March of 1941 alone. Their demise created a vacuum, leading to the deployment of less experienced or psychologically damaged men, often relying on tactics that were rapidly becoming outdated. The U-boat headquarters, operating with an authoritarian and often detached perspective, continued to deploy mentally and physically unfit officers, exacerbating the risks. This disconnect between command and crew began to reveal itself in stark, unsettling ways. The bar royal, a supposedly refined atmosphere for relaxation, became a thin veneer over the grim realities and anxieties the men carried. Returning crews were not the celebrated heroes of propaganda, but often hollow-eyed, gaunt, and physically or mentally broken. One such Ritter Kreutz, recipient Philip Thomson, recounted harrowing experiences. After one patrol, his boat returned with 4 pennants on its half-raised periscope, 3 white ones for merchant vessels and a red one for a destroyer. Yet, he would later speak of attributing successes to birthdays, a desperate search for meaning and pattern in a chaotic and deadly environment, highlighting the immense psychological strain. The initial jovial camaraderie of officers on shore leave would quickly devolve, fueled by excessive alcohol and the corrosive influence of war. The perceived disconnect between propaganda narratives of heroic warfare and the harsh realities, including unreliable torpedoes and the ethical dilemmas of combat, eroded their moral compass. One commander, Flechsig, a veteran from the old man's last crew, expressed his profound disillusionment with the petty bureaucracy, overshadowing the harsh realities of war. "Do you know what this idiot monkey said to me?" He'd begin, his frustration palpable. A young commander like Erler, hailed as a sea hero in his hometown, would uncork champagne with a single sharp blow from the back of a knife, the liquid shooting up as though from a foaming fire extinguisher, a theatrical bravado that thinly masked a growing hollowness. Even the old man, a cynical, observant leader, offered sardonic commentary, "We always have time for a quick swig." He witnessed the profound moral decay firsthand. Men like Truman, a notorious bad luck and drunken behavior, became an embodiment of the breakdown of discipline. He would disrupt the room, wielding a toilet brush as a symbol of mockery, shouting, "Silence in the Cathouse." The discussions would turn dark. Thomson, increasingly drunk and prone to terror, would declare, "The whole thing is a farce." He would add, chillingly, "As long as a man has a deck under his feet, you can shoot him down." When a profound debate ignited among Bowler, Thomson, and Truman regarding the ethical implications of war, specifically the treatment of shipwrecked enemy sailors, Bowler insisted, "After all, there are guidelines, explicit guidelines, gentlemen, orders." A man who openly disobeyed orders to rescue German seamen epitomized a lingering sense of humanity, declaring, "Concern for the fate of the shipwrecked is the first duty of every seaman." This moral erosion reached its nadir with officers like Flossman, who openly boasted of firing on lifeboats, representing a darker, more brutal element within the U-boat service. The immense psychological toll of war, coupled with this distorted moral compass, led to a complete unraveling of individual and group identity. The fragile veneer of civilization would shatter under Truman's influence. His violent outburst with a pistol, followed by his delirious yell of "everyone under the table," signified the complete breakdown of order. Afterwards, plaster would still trickle down from the ceiling, the air thick with unspoken tension. Amidst this chaos, Merkel's impromptu carol service, a desperate albeit temporary attempt to impose a shred of communal ritual with "O Thou Blessed Christmastide," only underscored the profound despair. This unraveling of discipline and the raw exposure to human depravity challenges the romanticized image of naval warfare. The story of the Bismarck sinking with 2,500 men, a stark reminder of the scale of loss, haunted these men, even as they struggled to maintain some semblance of order. Leaving the chaos of shore leave, the U-boat returned to the bombed-out ruins of its base. The harbour area, once a bustling civilian hub, was now a scene of utter devastation, forcing the military to adapt existing structures for defence and U-boat deployment. The bunker, a colossal concrete edifice with 12 pens for U-boats, stood as a testament to an extensive, ongoing defensive construction effort. A U-boat, the 7C-class vessel, measuring 220 feet long and 20 feet wide, with a displacement of over 1,000 cubic yards, required constant, intensive repair and maintenance. After sustaining damage, its bent starboard propeller blade produced a distinctive singing noise, a critical mechanical issue impacting operational stealth. A break in the cable connection with the E-machine affected the rudder, a crucial control system. Mechanics like Johann and Franz worked tirelessly on the diesel engines, representing the essential, hands-on technical expertise. Even a seemingly minor issue like the implied malfunctioning of torpedo equipment or the near disaster of Bechtel's unexploded depth charge pointed to the inherent dangers of operating with potentially flawed ordnance. This constant, gritty work of repair challenged any notion of pristine, perfectly maintained military machinery. It was about sheer tenacity, keeping a bombed-out tub operational after sustaining significant damage. The human cost was equally stark. Control room assistant Bakker was a casualty of a bombing raid on Magdeburg, a reminder that the war's reach extended far beyond the immediate combat zone. On board, a crew member like Thomsen exhibited extreme psychological distress, a breakdown due to the war's impact. The departure itself, at 2 o'clock on a wristwatch, was a ritualistic send-off, a stark contrast to the intimate, messy reality of war's impact. The old man, stoic and grim, issued orders, while the chief, his second-in-command, relayed technical information. The second watch officer expressed anxieties about operational delays due to fog, highlighting the omnipresent pressure. As the U-boat left the devastated harbour, it entered a new realm of claustrophobia and isolation. Operational areas were designated by small squares on a map, a stark simplification of a vast and deadly ocean. The commander, the old man, was the central authority, a mix of paternal concern and steely resolve. He had a keen eye for operational details and crew performance, but he also carried the weight of profound anxiety. The chief, the undisputed technical authority, meticulously supervised all mechanical aspects. He had a unique feel for the boat, having been on board since its commissioning. His racehorse nervousness was often hidden behind a gruff exterior. He described the crew, with its many hands tending to the machinery, as his flock of sheep, underscoring his deep sense of responsibility. The navigator, responsible for precise positional calculations, even in challenging weather, relied on dead reckoning and possessed almost eyes in the back of his head for his observational skills. In stark contrast, the first watch officer was portrayed as inexperienced, a gangling, pale, colourless type, whose preparedness was meticulous but seemingly superficial. The cramped U-room, the petty officer's quarters, was designed for efficiency but resulted in constant disruption. Every torpedo fired from the bow compartment meant a fleeting, added freedom of motion in the limited space. Life aboard this vessel was a metal womb, isolated and self-sufficient, where life was reduced to essential functions and constant vigilance. The old man's warnings about bubble tracks and the gentlemen of the other firm, lying in wait, foreshadowed the extreme risks. The primitive Metox receiver, an early warning system for radar, implied the constant vulnerability to Allied air power, forcing U-boat crews to maintain strict discipline and to shout the urgent command clear upper deck to dive. The transition from the confined yet socially charged harbour environment to the open, uncertain expanse of the Atlantic was absolute. Once alone on its course, detached from escort, the true commencement of its mission into enemy territory began. Life aboard the U-boat was a relentless cycle of tedium and tension. The oppressive silence after diving, the bottle green or almost black sea outside the periscope, highlighted the isolation. The constant stench of oil, the pervasive heat, the thin vibration that permeated the boat, these were the sensory hallmarks of their existence. The ingenuity required for survival was evident in the storage of provisions. Mountains of food, sausage hanging from the control room ceiling, as though in a smokehouse, and fresh bread filling the hammocks. Crew nicknames: the Bible scholar, the gigolo, maniac, the freed egg, revealed a unique camaraderie forged within the confines of the boat. Scheduled events, like the 16:30 practice dive, punctuated the monotony. This wasn't just routine, it was a complex, risky procedure. The Papenberg, a device used to measure the boat's depth relative to the periscope, was crucial for stealthy observation. The 7C boats were approved for a depth of 300 feet, but crews often pushed these limits. One trial deep dive forced the boat to 500 feet, where it horrifyingly scraped the bottom. The sound, exactly like a streetcar on a curve, sent a shudder like a chill through the boat. The chief worried about the vulnerability of the screws and rudder. The commander, the old man, maintained a stoic, almost fatalistic demeanor, even in this extreme danger. The navigator, Kriegbaum, recalled a pretty little error, 15 miles, from a previous fourth patrol, marked by intense enemy attack, emphasizing the inherent risks of navigation. The idiom, lash the helm, and take to prayer. Even the most mundane human needs became operational factors. The red light is on signal for an occupied toilet spoke volumes about managing limited resources. The raw expression of physical discomfort. My guts are now in upheaval. Damn it! When will the idiot in there finally come out? Humanized these men beyond any heroic archetype. The stark reality of the sea chart, uniformly blue-gray. No coastal edges, no shallows, only a thick network of squares with numbers and letters highlighted the abstract, unforgiving nature of wartime navigation. The U-boat's very existence was a paradox of vulnerability and technological marvel. On a Sunday at 7:46, an aircraft alarm demanded immediate emergency measures and a deep dive. The commander's words resonated. They know exactly when we put to sea. We're in for trouble. This marked a critical shift from routine patrol to anticipated, high-level threat. The speed of response was everything. As the conning tower hatch closed, its locking lever banged into the narrator's coccyx, a visceral pain, underscoring the chaotic haste. There was no time for the leather guard that should be covering this protruding iron handle. The chief, the gruff but knowledgeable authority, took a moment to explain the intricate science of their survival. The U-boat, weighing 880 tons, relied on air in the cells for buoyancy, making it a kind of life preserver. Maintaining balance to within 11 pounds was a constant, critical calculation. The specific gravity of water, influenced by depth, temperature, currents, and even sea life plankton, directly impacted buoyancy, turning submarine operation into a demanding scientific endeavor. The psychological trauma of constant air attacks was profound. The gruesome detail of a crashed bomber pilot's remains and fragments of sandwiches served as a stark reminder of mortality. The disaster on Kalman's boat in the fall of 1940 in the Brunsbüttel Channel, where a Norwegian freighter caused the U-boat to sink in seconds, was a haunting memory. Improvements like the green phosphorescent arrows for navigation in darkness were installed only after the disaster on Kalman's boat. The reality of U-boat life was far from glamorous. The U-room was thick, with the smell of sweat, oil, bilge, the smell of wet clothing. The endless demands and constant exposure to danger began to take a deep psychological toll. This reality shaped its leadership. The commander, the old man, returned from leave early, sacrificing a whole week's leave. He found civilian life a burden, constantly wearing his decoration, shopping, attending endless company, giving lectures in schools. The crew concluded he was not exactly rolling in domestic bliss. Red candles and very beautiful evening dresses hinted at a suppressed, complex inner world. The commander's leadership style was demanding, even cruel. He would secretly slip a note to the control room officer to initiate a surprise drill, pushing the crew to their limits. These practice alarms could be terrifying. Flooding valve rods turning, plates slipping, the boat tilting heavily, the cry of breach above the water gauge. The chief would appear completely drenched and out of breath after such a drill, his face showing the strain. The U-boat's diving mechanics were a complex symphony of cells, inner and two outer buoyancy cells, flood doors, air vents, buoyancy tanks initially for fuel oil, then air reservoirs, regulator cells for weight compensation, and trim cells for pitch control. U-boats were exquisitely sensitive to weight changes, prone to pitch up to 40 degrees, unlike surface vessels. The commander referred to his young crew as his kindergarten, his children's crusade, a way to reframe their perceived weakness as a source of psychological superiority, a challenge to the enemy's expectations. This detached amusement masked a deeper, almost sadistic desire for perfect execution. The eternal conflict between engineers and sailors manifested in crude insults. Diesel mechanic mate Frenson called diesels farters, while bosun's mate Witchman retorted that Frenson's diesels were farts. The discussions among crew members like E-mate Pilgrim and bosun's mate Witchman often revolved around crude sexual exploits, a desperate form of camaraderie. Herman, the soundman, a quiet, pale, withdrawn figure, whose father had went down in 1917, was dedicated to his craft of listening to radio signals, his specialized role underscoring the importance of intelligence gathering. A radio message detailing 7 hours depth charge pursuit was met with the commander's dismissive commentary, a chilling indifference to the immense peril endured by other boats. Even with meticulous preparation, an accidental dive to 600 feet occurred when an intake valve to the depth manometer was mistakenly closed. The torpedoes, described as fat, heavily greased and dully gleaming, were complex little ships in themselves, self-sufficient miniature U-boats loaded with 800 pounds of TNT. Their detonation could be either concussion-based or remote control via magnetism. On night watch, from 4 to 8 ships' time, the crew navigated a world of sensory deprivation and acute discomfort. Not much water coming over, but cold. Binoculars would quickly cloud over, requiring leather cloths to the bridge. The pounding of engines and the roaring of waves merged into a general silence that amplified every sound. The Atlantic here is at least 10,000 feet deep. Bet the lookout's duty was intense. Keep your eyes skinned, scanning 90 degrees of horizon and sea for smoke or escaping fuel oil from a damaged steamer. The Zeiss binoculars are heavy, arms beginning to fail. The pervasive smell of urine, the stench and dampness, the smell of diesel exhaust, these were the constant companions. The false alarm when helmsman Marcus mistakenly hit the alarm bell erupted into intense crew anger, highlighting the fragility of their composure. Such was the tension that mistakes could prove fatal. The commander, often brooding, was deeply affected by political questions. He despised Nazi propaganda. Bleeding the enemy of shipping capacity. They call it destruction of tonnage. Heine's tonnage. It's good ships they're talking about. Fucking propaganda turns us into official executioners, wreckers, slaughterers. His heart, he confessed, was with the ships themselves. For him, they're living things with pulsing hearts of machinery. It is abominable to have to destroy them. He even mocked the propaganda epithets for Churchill, a testament to his internal conflict. Sot, drunkard, paralytic. I must say that for a drunken paralytic, he's giving us one hell of a time. The dark humour related to sexual exploits and bodily functions in the bow compartment was a crude coping mechanism. Initial motivations, tempted by the aura, the feeling of being the creme de la creme, the Donetsk Volunteer Corps, and then, of course, there's the propaganda, began to crumble under the weight of this grim reality. The brutal training methods of instructor August Ritter von Karavec, when properly commanded, a division should be distinguishable from the terrain by nothing but the whites of their eyes, forged a form of resilience, but also bred deep cynicism. Most of the crew, it was acknowledged, were nothing but links in a chain, filling the gaps the designers have left in the machinery. They were mechanics, caretakers, often detached from direct combat. The constant repetition of sea-in-sea U-boat slogans like attack, defeat, destroy, and the Führer began to ring hollow. The staccato chatter of push rods and rocker arms, the contained torrent of explosions within the cylinders, Chief Mechanic Johann testing oil pressure and the cold water pressure. These were the true, monotonous realities of their daily grind. a fundamental flaw in design, where incomplete combustion left residue that jammed flood doors, meant boats were lost simply because the doors were jammed open and water rushed into the boat. This necessitated grinding in the doors every 4 hours, a constant, vital maintenance task. The despair of futility grew. So far, we have contributed nothing to the war effort of Greater Germany. We haven't inflicted the slightest damage on the enemy. We have added no luster to our name. The navigator's melancholy echoed the sentiment. The gentleman at headquarters ought to see all this just once, nothing but ocean and not a trace of the enemy. The human cost was also personal. Ensign Ullman was secretly engaged to a French girl, Francoise, who was pregnant and doesn't want the child if they didn't return. This poignant detail underscored the immense stakes and the fragility of hope. The contrast in human resilience was laid bare in a survivor's testimony. During the rescue from a sunken destroyer, most of the young ones were hanging in their life preservers, already drowned. They'd simply given up. Only the older ones struggled. There was one of them, over 40, and seriously wounded, and he survived. This highlighted that the deep bond and sense of belonging within the submarine crew, comradeship, were crucial psychological anchors. The romanticized image of the heroic warrior was replaced by the East Hagen, a plain, straightforward fellow with 7 patrols and a distinctive mustache, who meticulously recounted the sinking of a destroyer at angle 0, where he was the first to spot it, the boat sinking in a matter of seconds. This was the reality of their success, sparse and often accidental. By the 23rd day at sea, more than 3 weeks had passed, voyaging into emptiness. The strategic reality was becoming overwhelmingly clear. Allied convoy systems and superior reconnaissance capabilities, airplanes, radar rendered U-boat pack tactics increasingly ineffective and dangerous. The U-boat's own technological limitations, its dependence on the surface for battery recharge, its limited underwater range, no more than 80 miles, batteries flat in 1 to 2 hours at top speed, the enormous dead weight of its lead plate batteries made it hopelessly vulnerable. The High Command's strategic decisions and their understanding of the realities faced by their frontline crews were increasingly questionable. The primitive Metox receiver offered little warning against evolving Allied threats. German innovations, like the new acoustic torpedo with its homing head, were quickly countered by Allied ingenuity, such as towing those damned rattling buoys along on a long steel cable. Diverting the torpedoes. Position reports from other boats arrived, but no victory announcements. A report of a convoy in Square XY was quickly followed by the disappointment that their boat was not one of them assigned to the pursuit. Then came the dreaded report of Martin's boat, a former first watch officer of the Old Man, being depth-charged and losing contact with a convoy. A catastrophic intelligence failure came with the discovery of Ramlow's boat, a captured U-boat with all our secret material, all the codes, everything taken by the Tommies in one fell swoop. This meant the Allies had an undamaged boat of ours for ages now, compromising all German naval secrecy. Widespread reporting of Allied convoys in the North Atlantic only highlighted their own geographical disadvantage, positioned much too far to the south of them. Boats like Bachmann's were repeatedly ordered to report, suggesting severe operational issues. Meinig's boat was unable to dive, a critical, potentially fatal technical failure. The boredom was crushing, punctuated by extreme anxiety. Accidental deaths became grim anecdotes. Christmas Eve 1940, a firearm discharge. New Year's Eve, a hand grenade. A Christmas tree on board was a desperate attempt to maintain morale in dire circumstances. The commander himself, exhausted, frustrated, felt like a gardener who pulls up the weeds and tends the good plants, a metaphor for maintaining discipline among increasingly despondent men. His chief, visibly affected, looked as though he'd put green eyeshadow under his eyes to turn himself into a demon. The physical impact of high-speed running in rough seas was immense. Sea head-on, and the diesels at full speed should have expected what it would be like. On the 33rd day at sea, a Wednesday to have expected what it would be like, a faint hope emerged with a radiogram. Convoy headed west to be intercepted square Gustav Fritz. This was followed by another at 8 o'clock hours. Convoy sighted square Bruno Max. Steering northerly course, driven off by flyers. The commander made the difficult decision, course 270 degrees is, engines full speed ahead. A 24-hour fuel-intensive pursuit began, but the convoy was elusive, its course changing, forcing them to dive at 9:20 to avoid aircraft. Allied anti-submarine warfare (ASWA) had rapidly evolved. Destroyers now patrolled at a distance, sweepers operated ahead of convoys, and auxiliary aircraft carriers with carrier-based planes created hunting units. The strategy for the U-boats became one of maintaining contact, sending short signals until other boats could assemble for a hunt in packs, grappling with the war of nerves that weighed principally upon the higher-ranking officers, knew the era of easy victories was over. The whole bodywork gleams. The foreship looks like a huge anvil at sunset, a symbol of raw power, but also immense vulnerability. Suddenly, the pea soup. Fog and severe storms became a double-edged sword. Initially, they hindered the U-boat's ability to locate the convoy, forcing reliance on dead reckoning and leading to missed opportunities. Then, a fleeting sighting, a masthead, not a merchant ship, but a destroyer. The hunt had reversed. The commander, driven perhaps by ambition for a red pennant, the mark of a destroyer sunk, made a desperate decision: prepare to dive for a sonar search. Helm hard a port, the U-boat plunged. The hydrophone operator, his eyes empty, or wide and blank, was the boat's ears, his intense focus vital. The attack began. Monstrous explosions rocked the boat. The navigator relentlessly counted. 15, 16, 17, 18. The U-boat was forced to extreme depths, diving to 465 feet, far beyond its shipyard guarantee. The chief, displaying immense skill and composure, had it all figured out, maintaining stability. Then, the insidious, chirping sound of Aztec. A handful of pebbles rattles against the boat, the impact of the directional beam producing this low tinkling. Aztec represented a superior Allied detection technology, effectively neutralizing the U-boat's stealth. The physics were unforgiving. Water transmits pressure much more strongly than air. Depth charges, at 500 pounds for destroyer bombs, were weapons of indiscriminate destruction, targeting the flanges and pierced sections, the Achilles heel of the pressure hull. Even the commander, amidst the terror, offered a rare, brief moment of empathy. Destroyer crews really take a beating. It was a subtle acknowledgement of the shared brutality of naval warfare. After what felt like an eternity, the depth charge attacks ceased. A peace that felt fragile settled upon the boat. They had been driven to almost 700 feet, each square inch of the steel hull, withstanding 284 pounds, which means over 20 tons per square foot. The physical effects were profound. Displaced air in lungs, temporary deafness, the sound of cracking metal. Then, the horrific discovery. An expanse of wreckage from a sunken convoy, the Gulf Stream. Black fuel oil, crates, splintered lifeboats, charred remains of rafts, life preservers, complete superstructures, and worst of all, a whole field of floating corpses. The navigator, with a morbid curiosity, observed 3 or 4 drowned men hanging from their life jackets. The sight was a brutal reckoning, a visceral encounter with the human cost of their success. The commander maintained a forced bravado, attempting to manage his crew's fear. They methodically retrieved a life preserver, a tangible piece of evidence from the destruction. Then came the deeply unsettling, the discovery of a swarm of crabs, scurrying out from cracks, a symbol of a deeper breakdown of order and hygiene, adding personal indignity to the existential threats. In this claustrophobic hell, the crew desperately clung to normalcy. Music played on the loudspeaker, discussions about home front issues, cigarettes, ration cards, the possibility of baked apples, at this time of year, were attempts to anchor themselves against the abyss. But the reality was inescapable. Depth charges were ultimately inaccurate, their destruction brutal and indiscriminate. The U-boat war was a psychological grinder, a relentless dance with death, far removed from any romantic ideal. The collective experience of these U-boat men revealed a lost generation of sailors, their stories often hidden or romanticized by a nation unwilling to confront the full grim truth. Their profound disconnect between the perceived glory of naval warfare and its human cost serves as a powerful testament to the psychological burden of war, a legacy that continues to resonate. The sheer engineering of these vessels presented its own unique, brutal test. Out in the churning North Atlantic, the famed agility of the U-boat diminished drastically. Its narrow profile, at odds with its length, meant the propellers were simply too close together. All the boat's otherwise famous maneuverability doesn't amount to much in a high sea. This inherent design flaw made an already-as patrol even more punishing. It was the 42nd day at sea, a marker of unrelenting endurance. Yet, the weather was often a preamble to a far more existential threat. The chilling reality of depth-charge attacks was ever present. These weapons, paradoxically, were the most inaccurate weapon there is. Their true terror lay not in pinpoint accuracy, but in the sheer destructive force of proximity. The hunt could begin shortly after 12, a sudden shift from patrol to desperate flight. "We've been under pursuit for 2 hours." The call would echo, a lifetime compressed. Below the surface, the U-boat became a fragile shell, a metallic coffin. At extreme depths, the hull, less than an inch thick, became as fragile as an eggshell. The interior structure groaned under the immense pressure. A loud crackling and snapping filled the boat, a symphony of impending doom. Woodwork and interior structure cried out, protesting their unnatural burden at 700 feet. Every nerve-wracking interval between detonations was meticulously, fearfully counted. 47:48, the crew would whisper, a desperate mental stopwatch. Then, the violent concussion shaking the boat to its core. The lights often failed, plunging the interior into a terrifying darkness. The light goes out, a chilling pronouncement. The vital depth manometers, the crew's eyes on their survival, shattered. The glass plates of the depth manometers fall tinkling to the floor. The hands of both manometers are gone, leaving them blind to their true depth. Chaos reigned as critical systems began to buckle. A hissing stream of water would erupt, signaling a dangerous breach. A cracked water gauge could become a prelude to a larger catastrophe. This was the relentless reality, an intimate dance with mechanical failure and the abyss. Survival wasn't just about avoiding torpedoes, but about containing the internal breakdowns. And even the mundane, the constant struggle against the elements, persisted. At 19:00, despite the dangers, a mandatory inspection was due. The pervasive crab infestation was a grim testament to the squalid conditions. Such was the dichotomy. Life and death decisions intertwined with the indignities of close quarters. Yet, there were brief moments of calculated risk, influenced by the fading light. At 18:30 hours, twilight would begin to descend, offering a brief window. The decision to surface, to breathe fresh air, was always a perilous gamble. These isolated moments underscored the profound disconnect between the myth and the man.